Welcome to the Unscripted podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. Today, we're going to have a conversation about why psychological safety matters in the workplace now more than it ever has. I'm excited to welcome to the podcast today Sacha Thompson, who is the founder and CEO of The Equity Equation, a consultancy dedicated to helping organizations across the globe build more inclusive and psychologically safe work cultures. Sasha's insights have been featured on NBC News, MSNBC, Forbes, Newsweek, and many more. So we are very lucky to have her here with us today. Sasha, welcome to the Unscripted
Thank you, Sarah, for
podcast.
having me.
Of
Absolutely. Thank you so
course.
much.
Excited for our conversation. So
Yes.
before we get into it all, just tell everyone
Mhm.
a little bit more about yourself, your background, and the work you do.
Absolutely. So, hello, everyone. Again, my name is Sacha Thompson. One of these days, my mouth will work. My name is Sacha Thompson. As you said, I am the founder of the Equity Equation. I actually started the Equity Equation several years ago after leaving a workplace that wasn't psychologically safe for me. And I really spent a lot of time just really understanding why that was.
Hmm.
And so really came across research from Amy Edmondson and Dr. Timothy Clark around psychological safety and understanding, you know what, this is exactly what it is. I did not have the freedom to speak up, or if I did speak up, there was fear of retribution. There was harm that had been done. And so part of what I realized was one, leaders were just kind of regurgitating what they saw other leaders doing and didn't have their own way of leading. And two, people not understanding that you manage people, you don't necessarily always manage projects.
Hmm.
And so what does it mean to manage and lead people in a way where people are giving their best, right, to
Hmm.
the workplace? And so I've spent the last several years kind of working in this space and working with organizations to start to unpack what those things look like every single day.
Wonderful. It's very important work. The reason I said in the intro, it's more important than ever is, in my opinion, I think the importance of this topic is so crucial because number one, a lot of our audience is struggling to recruit in new talent. And so the first thing that makes this crucial is today's talent is not willing to tolerate what yesterday's talent would, right? Number two, this, the concept of psychological safety, the concept of inclusive cultures, it's just fundamental to true innovation, right? And so a lot of
Yeah,
our audience is looking at, how are we becoming the company of the future? You, in my opinion, you won't get there if you don't get this right. So I think it's just, such an important space to do work in.
absolutely. I think one of the misnomers that's out there is that, if you have a position open within your organization, people are going to do, all the research online. Yes, that's true, but they're going to find out, who do I know that works there that's going to tell me the skinny? They're
Hmm.
not looking at Glassdoor. They're going to ask friends that they know or people that they know. And people are not going to say truly bad things about the culture on Glassdoor,
Hmm.
especially if they are from a marginalized group in some way. There's the psychological safety is not there. And so those conversations happen offline.
Hmm.
So even if you have a position that's available, people understand and know, okay, the real culture of this organization is this and not necessarily what's written on the cafeteria wall. So I need organizations to understand that if you're going to talk the talk, you also have to be able to walk it as
Yeah.
well. And your actions and words have to be in alignment. If that's not there, then that'll be what speaks about your culture more so than anything else that a recruiter will be able to say
Hmm.
about the organization. So
Hmm.
I think that's one. The second thing that you said I think is so critical is innovation happens when there is psychological safety, when people
Hmm.
can challenge the status quo, when people can throw an idea out of left field and not feel like, someone's going to say, oh, well, that's stupid,
Hmm.
right? Because if someone feels like that's what's going to happen, they're going to hold on to their ideas. So, excuse me, if someone has an idea that is not the norm for the organization, and they feel comfortable speaking up. And then people realize, you know what, if we were to do this, this could open up this audience to us,
Hmm.
or this can position us in a different way with this group of people. That is where the innovation happens. And I think so many organizations are so accustomed to the status quo, and this is just the
Hmm.
way we've always done things, that they miss out on the opportunities to really tap into the talent that you have within,
Hmm.
because you probably have so much untapped talent that that are afraid to speak up because
Right.
of what they witnessed to other people that have brought good ideas forward.
Yeah. And, this idea of, you know, a culture that welcomes challenging, right? It's not just about being the person that has the next big idea. It's also about being empowered to ask hard questions or to push back, right? So I had a leader on the podcast a few months ago, Michael Potts, who has taken a new role, but at the time he was the SVP at ACO. And,
Mhm.
he had a quote that has stuck with me and will for a long, long time. He said, as a senior leader in this business, I see it as my job to challenge the status quo, but how could I possibly do that well if I don't invite others to challenge me? And that's, that mentality, I think one, it's the right mentality, but two, it's right if you mean it. And
Yeah.
if you see the value in that, because going back to your point, what's almost more detrimental than just saying, hey, we have a really shitty culture here is saying, you know talking the talk and then not following through, right? So to say like, oh, we welcome input from everyone when you really don't, is worse than just being upfront about the state of affairs, right? So yeah, I love that quote, love that point.
No, it's absolutely true, right? We all know when we hear phrases like do what I say and not what I do,
Hmm.
that's not a place that I want to be,
I
right?
know. I do
So,
say that to my kids. Well, more so my husband. My kids, I say because I
oh,
said so.
yeah,
My
husband
husband,
got
I
it.
say do as I say, not as I do. Yeah. It is what it is.
Yeah. But when you have a leader, and I say this to the folks that I coach, I say this, as I'm doing trainings, um, are you modeling the behavior that you want to see?
Hmm.
Because if you're not modeling and doing the things that you are saying other people need to do, then why would they believe you? Why would they
Hmm.
believe that it's important? Why would they believe that that's, one of your values when
Hmm.
you're not even doing it, right? And so that is where trust happens. And I talk about trust being, where actions and words are in alignment consistently.
Hmm.
And so if people are not seeing that what you are saying and what you are doing are not in alignment, why would I trust that you have anything else that you say is actually true?
Hmm.
So, it is entirely up to the leader to really be able to model what they are saying. And I think we're now in a time and a place, especially where the rhetoric is not going to cut it,
Hmm.
right? People have to see, if my leader says X, I expect X.
Hmm.
And they're consistent with X. Because when Y happens, they're going to see that as the anomaly and not oh, yeah, that's what I expected because they never do X.
Hmm. Yeah.
Right. And so I think in these times, people really need to understand that it just has to be in alignment. The
Hmm.
other thing that I think is so critical in that's a part of that, is modeling vulnerability.
Hmm.
We are taught that leaders, are strong and leaders know it all. And I'm like, the leaders are human. We
Hmm.
make mistakes. We are flawed individuals. And so if you speak about the mistakes or how the lessons learned through those mistakes, it allows people to understand that it is okay to make a mistake.
Hmm.
How do we deal with that? And so that too kind of helps with that community of trust that
Hmm.
you're trying to build within your team, which helps to increase the psychological safety, not just of the individuals, but the team as well.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, we're all human, right? So modeling that gives people the sense that they too are allowed to be human, whatever that means, to have opinions, to need help, to make mistakes, all of those things. I just had a really interesting conversation with another great leader, Giner Osgood, who was on, and you would really enjoy it. We were talking about some of the untold truths of leadership. And one of the ones that we talked about is that everyone says fail fast, but everyone's still avoiding failure, right? And we got into the why, but a really important point he made is that when we say fail fast, like we think we're giving people permission. And let's say we say it and we mean it, okay? Not the, we're not going to get into if we're just saying things. But his point is, there's so much ambiguity in that it actually causes more anxiety than it does empower people. So the mindset is right. You don't learn, you don't innovate if you don't accept that failure will happen along the way. But as leaders, it's not only our job to kind of, have that catchphrase and like let people know it's okay, but to show them what that looks like and to set parameters so that they know kind of what you know, the guidelines are and things like that. And we also talked about the fact that when you have, people that have been in the workforce for any amount of time, many of them have come from cultures that weren't necessarily psychologically safe, where failure was, something
Not an
to
option.
avoid at all costs,
Right.
right? So
Yeah.
the other point we made is you can't just say this once and expect that like everyone's going to buy into it and take you at face value. You need to reinforce that and also to your point, lead by example, own up to some of your own shortcomings in a way that lets people know it happens to everyone and it's okay and here's how I'm learning from it, etc. So,
Yeah. That phrase fails fast, if I recall correctly, initially kind of became popular in the tech industry, like when they were having all of those startups and it's like,
mhm,
move quick, fail fast, keep moving. It didn't even work there.
mhm,
Right. And as someone who came, spent 10 years in the tech industry, worked at a startup, didn't work there.
mhm,
So that let's put that there. The other thing that immediately came to mind when you said that was how each generation, and I'm air quoting generation, responds to that is going to be very different,
mhm,
right? Just because of what they need in order to feel safe and in the workplace,
mhm,
right? To me, that fail fast is probably more of a Gen X
mhm,
um, phrase, because Gen X is the generation that is just like, okay, whatever, I'll do it myself. I'll
mhm,
just build it and figure it out myself. Whereas some other generations are a bit more cautious when it comes to those types of things, right?
mhm,
You have some generations, younger generations, that are like, just tell me what to do,
mhm,
right? So if it's fail fast, okay, well, I don't want to fail. So I just need you to tell me all of the steps that you want me to do so that I'm doing it the right way,
mhm,
which may be the right way for the leader, but it may not be the comfortable and right way for you to get to
right.
the same end goal. So, I think it's important, as you're saying, phrases like that for us to keep in mind too, that it doesn't translate well across generations. It doesn't
Mhm,
translate well across different cultures, even.
yeah.
What does that look like? If you have a culture that is more individualistic,
Mhm,
that means one thing than to a group that's more community based,
mhm, yeah.
right? And so all of those things kind of fall into place. And so when, we're thinking about how to motivate our groups, our teams, it's what can I say that will speak and resonate with everyone
Mhm,
in a
yeah.
way that I can kind of get the best from everyone. And it may be three or four different phrases
Mhm,
that you have to come up with, right, in order to get the end result or the goal that you want. So
yeah.
it's interesting to me because even as we are moving through this, and I do more and more conversations around psychological safety, people are starting to get and understand like this isn't just I can give everyone the same thing and expect the
Mhm,
same outcome. You can't do that.
yeah.
If you have children, like you can't give them the same thing and expect the same outcome. Not
Mhm,
comparing team people on our teams to children. However, sometimes that is the case.
mhm.
But not
Everyone's
everybody needs
different.
this. yeah, not everyone needs the same thing in order to be successful. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think the more and more leaders start to understand that and realize, okay, for me to get the best out of Sarah, I need to do X, Y, and Z versus Sacha, who might need A, B, and C.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
And I
you have
think,
to be that prescriptive.
right. And I think, unfortunately, there's a percentage of people that are still looking for the shortcut to not having to know everyone individually that well, right? And from interviewing hundreds, thousands of leaders, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. There's no way to take that shortcut. And if you really want to create teams that work well together, you need to, understand the individuals. And to your point, what matters to them, what motivates them, where do they
Mhm.
want to get to, et cetera, right? That is really important. But I like the reminder too about thinking through, whether it's a catchphrase or just, communication around an initiative or a project, is the terminology I'm using something that might resonate with some, but cause anxiety with others, and be conscious of those realities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think part of that, one of the things that I do with organizations is say, okay, let's get to the lowest common denominator of a team within your organization. Have they spent time together to figure out what they need for psychological safety within that team?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And part of that is doing our own individual work. So even if a leader can't do the individual work, I, as someone on this team, need to know and understand what I need for psychological safety so that I can then communicate that to the folks that I am working with every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we now have um, an understanding of how we're going to work together. And
Mm-hmm.
I think a big part of when we see challenges in the workplace is because we have not had a dialogue on the best way for me to work and the best way for you to work together.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay, this is my job, this is my lane, I'm going to do my part of this, which is very individualistic thinking
Mm-hmm.
versus the team dynamic and what we all need to do in order to work collectively as a group so that we have success as a group.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. So let's talk about then on the topic of psychological safety. What would you say are like the crucial components of this for leaders and businesses to understand?
So the first two that so let me back up a second. One of the things that I do with organizations is an assessment,
Hmm.
right? The assessment that I have is on psychological safety and inclusion. So we try to understand, how people feel when they are working within a team. And so some of the things that have bubbled up, number one, trust and respect, right? If I do not trust my leader, the folks on my team, if that's not there, there is no psychological safety,
Hmm.
period, right? Respect. And that is me respecting, again, my leader, me respecting my team, or me even feeling respected.
Hmm.
If that's not there, then there's no psychological safety. The other part, one of the other things is open communication. Is there two-way communication? And is it in a way that meets everyone's needs?
Hmm.
And I give the example of I worked with a client in New York where they had an aha moment of many of the folks that were communicating directly with their clients were texters,
Hmm.
but their client base were baby boomers. And so they're like, why do they always want to pick up the phone?
Hmm.
That's how they communicate, right? That's how they like to communicate. And so if they're your client, you have to meet them where they are and not the other way around.
Hmm.
So creating an environment of psychological safety, you really have to understand what does open communication look like? One, for the channels, but is it two-way? Right? Is if I am I given the idea as a leader and saying, okay, yep, the decision's been made, but there was no input to how that decision, how it came about, or we weren't even involved in the whole process. Now you're knocking out trust. So those are some that immediately come to mind. Another thing that I think is critical and important in this is inclusion and belonging.
Hmm.
People want to feel that they are included, and especially in places and spaces where there's still hybrid work, People want to feel like they are connected to the organization. They want to see how their job fits into the bigger scheme of things. They want to
Mhm.
feel valued. They want to feel like, okay, I see how what I do impacts the work that we do for the greater good,
Mhm.
right? So they want to feel that value, but they also want to feel like they belong. They want to feel like, you know what, I love working here. I want to be connected to this place, and they may not say that, but when people don't feel valued and they feel disconnected, or they don't feel as if they're a part of the puzzle, they start to kind of shy away from the work. And remember quiet quitting some time ago?
Mhm.
That's when you start to see that, where people
Mhm.
start to just do the bare minimum to kind of get by. So those are the things that immediately come to mind when I think about, what people are looking for when it comes to psychological safety, and kind of what we measure on the day to day.
Mhm. Yeah. Now, how does a leader know if they've, actually been successful at creating psychological safety within their team?
One, it takes time. It's not a checkbox, right?
Hmm.
Two, they'll start to notice and see people coming to them in different forms, different ways, sharing feedback, sharing information, sharing ideas. People that would typically be quiet, um, sharing. And I always caveat that with, just because someone is quiet does not mean that they're not engaged, right?
Hmm.
I am an introvert by nature. I say an introvert with extroverted tendencies. Um, I process how I process things. I may not say anything in the meeting immediately. It may
Hmm.
be after, right? So are people engaging with you even after the meeting? Are they sharing their feedback, good, bad, and or indifferent,
Hmm.
right? Do you feel that you have not just an open door, but there's that open communication, that
Hmm.
people can communicate with you, as well as you communicate with them? I think when leaders start to see that from everyone on their team, that's when they know there is some level of psychological safety that is there. If they notice, hey, Mark is usually pretty engaged, and for some reason he's not right now, excuse me, what is it that's going on? Do I know enough about Mark to understand there may be something going on in his life? There may be something else that's happening that might be impacting how he's showing up. Um, and do I feel comfortable enough to be able to speak to, hey, I've noticed that you're not showing up in the same ways. Is there, how can I best support you right now?
Hmm.
Right? You're not getting into his business, right? But you are asking in a way like, I'm noticing, and I want to be able to help and support you.
Hmm.
Right. So I think having that type of skill, and we're talking emotional intelligence at this point,
Hmm.
um, having people be able to see that as a leader, or be able to tap into that as a leader, I think even if you don't have psychological safety, but you have the EQ, you should be able to address those little things when they do come up.
Hmm. Okay. All right, so I want to do kind of like a little make-believe exercise, okay? And I
Okay.
know there's no way for you to like, do this for real, but let's just kind of imagine like three different scenarios, okay? And I'm thinking like if, a leader came to you, wanted to work on psychological safety, you did your assessment and found that they were doing horribly, right? Where would you start? And then two, like let's say someone's kind of like middle of the line, right? Like what are you kind of coaching them to add, change, refine? And then third, like if you're working with someone who overall is doing an excellent job, but understands that there's always room for improvement, like what's kind of the, focus areas you're pointing them toward?
So I've actually had this scenario happen. So this is great. So for the leader that was not doing so well, I think one, sharing the assessment results with them in a
Hmm.
way that is unbiased,
Hmm.
right? These are the results from the team. I'm just sharing the data with you. Um, One of the things that I appreciate about the assessment that we use is it allows me to also see themes, right? So is this, or are we seeing that it's a lack of trust,
Hmm.
right? Are we seeing that it's a communication issue? Are we seeing that people don't feel valued, right? So the coach in me starts to ask questions around, okay, so let's say it's about value. What are some things that you can do to show your team that you value their contributions and help you kind of work through that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we go from getting the data and the results to understanding that this is real data. This is from
Mm-hmm.
your team, because that's the other thing that I often get is, oh, well, that's not real. It's biased. I'm like, no, this is your team.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start there. But then it's the coaching, right? Because my job is to kind of help you upskill in some of those areas.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done that with a leader before where he actually had some challenges with people leaving his team because of the lack of communication. What we ended up finding was he was just regurgitating things that leaders before him had done
Mm-hmm.
and not really established himself as a leader, because this was the first time he was leading people,
Mm-hmm.
and he was repeating bad habits, right? So let's start working on how do you want to show up as a leader, right? Started looking at some of this feedback. What are some things that you can do? One of the first questions that I had him ask was, how can I best support you?
Mm-hmm.
And he was just like, I never thought to ask that question because I always assumed that I knew what they needed.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So with that leader, it's a little bit more hand holding, but it's also understanding some of those aha moments of why are you showing up the way that you're showing up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. For the one that's in the middle, I always ask, where do you feel you need the most support? Right. And it's often maybe one or two things that might need to be tweaked with them. It may be, I've been leading people for a while. I might have someone that's difficult on my team. So it's now, how do you deal with that
Mm-hmm.
situation? Right. So it's helping them, actually setting them up to be a more of a coach with that person. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
now you're helping that person's professional development because there may be some things that they're lacking or you assume that they should know that they just don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's, how do I help you kind of get the best out of your people? So that's kind of, it really just depends on what the situations are, but it really is kind of getting to those, what are those few areas that might not be, you're not showing up the best way?
Mm-hmm.
How can we work on those? But then how do we amplify the things that you're doing well?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's part of that. Let me feed into you so
Mm-hmm.
that you're not doing horribly. Let's continue to just nurture what you're doing. For the leader that is phenomenal, that um, is kind of hitting on all cylinders, what I often say to them and what I do with them is, as a coach, my job is to kind of help you get that to the next level, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can always do better. And so how else can you best support your team? Or how can you best support your colleagues that might
Mm-hmm.
be struggling? How can you be a mentor to them or help guide them in this process? And so
Mm-hmm.
it gives them this opportunity to think about things in a different way. I had a leader who had been with an organization for 13 years. His team was doing great. Excuse me. He hadn't even thought about how he could best support the other VPs that were part of the
Mm-hmm.
organization that may not have been there as long. Right. So we shifted it from his team to how can you then show up to be a better part of the team that you're a part of.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really kind of gave him some empowerment in that space.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, in that scenario, that's kind of how I work with it. It's really understanding kind of where people are, where we would like them to be, and kind of
Yeah.
moving toward that.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So I think, okay, so I want to go back to, we talked about trust. And I noticed a post of yours where you're talking about trust as a catalyst for change, which makes perfect sense. For our audience, and like many, industries, businesses, leaders, there's a lot of change at once, and it never goes away. It doesn't slow down. No one gets sort of a reprieve anymore.
Yeah.
Um, so can you explain a little bit you know, intersection of trust and psychological safety and how that helps create a culture where teams are, willing to change?
I'm trying to figure out the best way to approach this angle. So, as I said before, trust is paramount to psychological safety. And so, as things are changing, I think what is most important, what I have noticed with organizations or leaders within organizations, is when there is so much uncertainty that is out there, speak to the elephant in the room,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's number one. There are things that are changing here. It is going to be ever evolving, or, things will continue to change. What I know to be true is X,
Mm-hmm.
right? We will continue to work toward our mission and our goal. We will continue to serve our customers and our clients in the best way that we can. We will continue to support you and your needs, right? Whatever those things are, right? Those three things we know to be true and will
Mm-hmm.
never change regardless of what is going on around us. So I think if you have something that you can firmly stand on, I think that kind of helps people realize, okay, we're still moving forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have that to kind of look toward. Um, this is where I think communication is incredibly, incredibly important. And that means if it's policy change, how are you communicating that to your staff? If there's a layoff, how are you communicating that? Excuse me. One of the biggest mistakes that I have seen within organizations is if there's a riff or a layoff or something that is happening where it's going to impact your staff, like people are going to be leaving, acting as if nothing has happened,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is probably one of the most detrimental things that you can do to the morale of your team, to the psychological safety of your organization, is to act as if we have now lost a third of our staff
Mm-hmm.
and everything is the status quo. We're just going to continue doing things the way we've always done things. No, address what has happened.
Mm-hmm.
What is the impact, right? Will that shift priorities? Will that change job roles, right? What is the impact? And the more that you can communicate those things, I think the better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Talk about what that also means to, there's a level of mourning that
Mm-hmm.
happens as well, right? This isn't just losing positions. These are our colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
These are friends, right? So speak to that. I had one leader where they lost half of their team, and the leader said, I'm being told by senior leaders to act as if nothing has happened.
Mm-hmm.
But we are in deep mourning because our team has been together for so long. And so he made the decision to spend a couple of hours just addressing that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And asking, how can I support you right now? Right? These are the things where my hands are tied, but this is where I can help you. And it's taken the time to do that. So I
Can I
think when
ask you a
there's,
question there?
yep, yeah.
So, because this is interesting, right? So let's just say, you're coaching that leader who's in that position and senior leadership is telling him, pretend that nothing's going on, right? What advice are you giving that person? Because, this is the reality of this topic, for probably a good number of people that might listen to this episode, right? Which is like,
Hmm.
I always refer to this as like, I think there's like a tide of change in leadership that is underway, right? From, I always say like the real old school mentality. That's not a descriptor of age necessarily, because to
It's a
your point,
mentality.
there's people that come in that just learned from people with that mentality that just adopt it because they don't know any different, right? And they
Yep.
could be young. So it's not about age, but it's this whole command and control, show no weakness, play your cards close to your chest, you know, results at all costs, et cetera, right?
Yep.
And, you know, I think that type of leadership is on its way out, right? For sure. And I'm excited about that. But there's still plenty of them around, And
Hmm.
so, what advice do you give a leader in an organization where there's a mixture of, mentalities, leadership styles, approaches, and they are aiming to create psychological safety, inclusion, have a good culture among their team, but dealing with those factors of reporting to people that think differently?
So one, as a coach, I'm never going to give advice. The questions that I would ask
Fair.
would be, um, one, what makes this important to you?
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that comes to mind is, what are the reasons behind why the senior leadership is operating this way,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, are there, or, and I would not quite ask it like this because this is a yes no question, but are there folks that are part of that senior leadership team that are more in alignment with how you think than kind of
Mm-hmm.
what's going on, and how can they be your champion?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want to start asking the questions to kind of get them thinking about, okay, how do I kind of manage up
Mm-hmm.
while I'm trying to manage down?
Yeah.
Right. And who that's part of my peer group is kind of in alignment with me.
Mm-hmm.
Because the other thing that I have quickly noticed is if there's a good number of folks in that peer group that are saying, listen, if we were to say this to our staff, this is what's going to happen, right? And we can be proactive in how we respond. If it's done as a collective, it's much more difficult to say, no, do it this way than
Mm-hmm.
if it's one individual,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
who are the other folks that can help champion this for you?
Yeah.
Um, But then the third, I think third or fourth, I don't know where I am right now, but um, speaks to what you were talking about. And the question that came to my mind was, is this the type of place that I want to continue my career?
Yeah. Which is ultimately where you get to, right? And I bring this up because this is a conversation I've had with more than one leader who's saying like, I see such potential here. I want to make a positive impact, but I feel like I'm fighting uphill all the way, and I just don't know if it's worth it, right? And it's a tough question to come to an answer on, right? Is sort
Yeah.
of, when how long you try and what ways you try and, how much you're willing to work on that versus, when do you start to kind of consider that maybe there's a company out there that has values that are better aligned to yours, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it is, I think, that question, not that either of us would have answers, even philosophically, is very correlated to this topic because I think this topic of psychological safety is a fundamental pillar of this sort of old school versus new school leadership styles, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the old school leaders are going to say, I don't care. You know what I mean? Like, here's your
Right.
job, do it, right?
You're not
Because
supposed to
that's
have
the
feelings.
mindset. Exactly. And so, you know, if you care about this topic, you may then find yourself in situations where you are working with or for people that are at odds with those beliefs, and you have
Mm-hmm.
to kind of sort through, to what extent you're willing to invest in that.
Yeah. And
Um,
there's two things that like come to mind as you're saying that. One, the whole reason I got into this work is because, I was working in an organization that wasn't psychologically safe. And I would constantly describe it as I am pushing a boulder up a hill with daggers being thrown at my back,
mhm,
right? Like there was just no protection. There was nothing there that I felt supported. And my coach said to me, where do you have the most impact, inside or outside of the organization? And it took me months to be able to respond to that question because I felt like, oh no, I need to be inside. Duh. Don't know. I'm like, listen, let me get out.
mhm,
Let me figure out what I need to do. And I found that creating an environment that was psychologically safe for me is where I show up the absolute best.
mhm.
So I think that people need to understand what is important to them and what their boundaries are kind of
Yeah,
in this space.
yeah.
The second thing is, and to your point, we're now in a place where we have five generations in the workforce. The two youngest generations are looking for psychological safety as a norm,
Mhm,
right? And are very quick to be like, nope, I'm out. If I don't feel that this place values me or my contributions, or if I'm being belittled, they're out,
mhm,
right? So organizations have to quickly realize, I think right now, millennials are the largest group in the workforce.
mhm,
Then we have Gen Z and Gen Alphas shortly, right? I think right now they're like the interns that are coming in.
mhm.
These generations have high expectations of inclusion and are quickly overtaking the older generations in the workforce.
Yeah.
So if you want to be sustainable, and I have some data somewhere that says within the next 10 years, if you want your organization to thrive, you need to be able to meet the needs of these generations.
Yeah. And I just want to say this very clearly. Having an expectation of psychological safety is not entitlement. Okay?
Point blank
Because
period, not at all.
this is what those old school leaders will think. Well, they're
Yeah,
entitled. They expect X, Y, and Z, but they haven't worked for it. No, psychological safety is not something you have to work for. It is something that should exist
yeah,
in the workplace, and they recognize that. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't individuals who have unrealistic expectations for where they are in their career, et cetera, et cetera. That's fine. This is not the same thing.
right.
Being able to trust people, having communication, feeling valued, being respected, those are table stakes expectations, not a
Right.
sign of entitlement.
Those are the
That doesn't
those are
matter if
basic
you're 19
expectations.
or 90. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I
And
just
I'm
want
glad you
to
said that because I
underscore
think
that.
what was what made that really come to the forefront of my mind was during the pandemic when we were first kind of going into the pandemic and everything the organization said that we could not do. Quickly they realized that they could. And part of that was, this work from home, this hybrid, all of these things that these younger generations have been trying to push. And what has been interesting in this return to work or return back to the office is now some of these older generations are like, wait a minute, we didn't know that we could have these things.
Mm-hmm.
And now you've proven that we can.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost this, wait a minute, like, why am I going to be shackled here when
Mm-hmm.
I know that you can do it. I know you can accommodate because you've had to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a mindset shift. And I
Mm-hmm.
think part of that is understanding that the old school way of working and operating is not the only way
Right.
to operate. And it's organizations that can quickly understand that we need to start to shift because the generations are going to keep coming.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't continue this old school mentality if you want to be viable.
Yeah. Okay. I know we are just about out of time, but I
Oh,
want to
wow.
get to one more question. Okay.
Okay.
Anyone that knows me knows I'm not going to let you go without talking about this. So there's a lot of buzz at the moment around DEI. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask you two things. Number one, buzz or no buzz, why do we need to keep in mind that diversity, equity, and inclusion matter so much?
So I think we talked about a little bit of it throughout the show, right?
Hmm.
So, one, I need people to get in their minds that diversity is more than just race and gender,
Hmm.
right? Like, so let's broaden that. When we think about what we just discussed around generations, that is diversity,
Hmm.
right? So age diversity is a thing. Ageism on the front end and back end is a thing.
Hmm.
And so we cannot escape diversity, regardless of what it is. I think people now, especially even when you think about neurodivergent, more and more people are being diagnosed.
Hmm.
And so this is a thing. This is not something that you can push to the wayside or, oh, it's just a trend. This is who we are, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that it's important that the more and more we realize, especially as we become a more global economy,
Hmm.
we cannot escape diversity. It's how do you deal with it and understanding that we are not a microcosm.
Hmm.
We're multicultural, diverse individuals with different backgrounds and experiences that shape who we are. So I think organizations need to understand that this is not something that we can escape.
Hmm.
That's one. I'll go to inclusion. And that is what we've been talking about. Like that's one of the key aspects of psychological safety. Do
Hmm.
I feel that I'm included? Do I feel that I belong, right, to an
Do I feel I have a
organization?
voice?
Do I have a voice? Do I feel valued
Hmm.
here? Right? That's what you want people to feel, and you want them to be a part of that culture. So again, inclusion is not something that can be cut away and you expect people to operate in their best functioning selves. It's
Hmm.
not going to happen. Equity, I think, is what is being fought right now. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people are not saying that. Um, but equity is the piece where people feel that it's unfair.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I look at equity as how do I either provide support or remove barriers in order for people to be successful,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that's how organizations need to operate. Not everyone's going to need the same thing in order to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And so you're starting to see it in job descriptions, right? They're modifying these things because not everyone has the same background that's coming into a position, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're making accommodations for folks. So even if those words go away, what we do in those spaces will always continue. They're not going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're going to see more complexity. We're going to see more diversity. We're going to see more needs for accommodations in some ways. And in order to be, again, a viable organization, you have to be able to expect and understand that that's going to be the new status quo.
Mm-hmm. And the second part of what I wanted to ask you is, the buzz that is around right now, what impact, if any, do you see this having on workplaces in the sense of, the companies and leaders that you're working with?
So two things I am noticing. One, I have noticed that organizations are renaming things in order to continue doing the work or to provide the support that they feel people need. I
Mm-hmm.
think two, people are looking at um, the overall work, not as a program, but as how do we show up in this space? If we're talking about inclusion, what does that really look like
Mm-hmm.
from a systemic viewpoint
Yeah.
versus a program? Which I think is a good thing. And it should have always been that way to
Right.
begin with. The other thing that I have noticed and I've heard from several of my clients has been we're moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
We're not doing anything illegal. They've worked with their legal teams to be prepared to come up with responses. And they're being proactive
Mm-hmm.
in the space. They're not making the changes ahead of time because, oh, no, we're moving forward. This is our stance. And those are the organizations that I think their employees actually trust
Mm-hmm.
the work that they've been doing, right? They're 10
Mm-hmm.
toes down to say, yep, we're moving forward, we're continuing. I believe my company values me.
Mm-hmm.
It's the companies that have been faltering or, oh, we're going to change this. Oh, and they don't know what they're doing, that the employees lack the trust
Mm-hmm.
and their clients and customers start to lack trust,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are starting to see their bottom lines slowly
Yeah.
diminish because they don't know where they stand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, when I think about the conversations I've had on this podcast over the last 7 years, before this buzz was a buzz, right? It was,
Mm-hmm.
it's always come back to the fact that, this has never been about an acronym. It's
Never.
always been about either understanding fundamentally the value of diversity and inclusion in what we said at the very beginning, its ability to bring strong talent into your organization and have them work well, and you know it being a necessary ingredient to being creative and being innovative and
Mm-hmm.
being reflective of your customer base, right? And
Yeah.
the fact that the world is diverse, and yeah, so it's interesting to get your perspective. I mean, I reached out to a group of women that I've interviewed over the years in March for International Women's Day. One of the questions I asked was sort of around, how is this affecting, your organization's approach, et cetera. And many of them echoed what you said, like, it's not, like, we're just
Mm-hmm.
continuing to, understand that there's value in, you know, everyone and treat them accordingly. And,
Yeah.
make sure that we're doing the things we know are important for our workforce, for our business, for our customers, and so I think
Yeah.
that's a
I
really
mean,
good.
honestly, it's about broadening the pool,
Hmm.
right? And to call a thing, it's increasing competition.
Hmm.
And so if people feel that they are, no, I will say it this way. If people are mediocre and the pool is broadened, the
Yeah.
fact that they're mediocre will be highlighted, right?
Hmm.
And so it's how do we create an environment where our lack of talent, our lack of skills can still rise to the top. And to do that is to get rid of the competition.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so that's honestly what's happening right now.
Hmm.
No one is saying that, but that's what it is, right? We don't want to broaden the pool because then our lack of whatever it is
Hmm.
will then be highlighted,
Right. Yeah.
right? So that's all this is.
Well, I think it's exciting, it's interesting. And I know your work hasn't slowed down, which is indicative of the fact that all of these things matter and will continue to matter. And the leaders and businesses that understand that, I think will come out ahead. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Yes, it was. You can find more by visiting the home of the Unscripted podcast at futureoffieldservice.com. The podcast is published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more at ifs.com. As always, thank you for listening.